when I saw the USAID insignia coming off of the building in Washington, D.C., I thought of all the work you have done to expose this, even well before Doge, well before Elon was engaged in politics. Just first, what did it feel like that so often we put all this effort into projects in Washington and the establishment wins or the powers that be win. This time, like, Mike Benz won. What's it like?
It's amazing to see. This was really a, big tent, moving parts team. Swift, bold action was taken by the Trump White House month one. This was announced in early February. And it was, at the time, I'm not sure that the admin fully understood what they were kicking over when they did this. I think what actually motivated the policy move to shut down USAID was because at heart, USAID really is not supposed to be an independent agency. It's supposed to serve the State Department. And then the White House works with the State Department, and then effectively directive is kind of trickles down from White House to State to USAID. And that game of telephone combined with USAID's kind of black box and the inability to actually get anything out of them simply led them to say, well, listen, you're not letting Doge in. You're a duplicative function. You belong at State. And I don't think they really knew that they were kicking over this hornet's nest of black ops intelligence work, covert, deniable military and paramilitary activity, gun running, drugs, soft power regime change, media control, flooding the universities with cash, strange, bizarre partnerships with the private sector, with so many of our country's largest juggernauts. But that's all gotten now absorbed by State. And the nice thing is, in addition to absorbing AID, where there will be a lot more transparency, because USAID has been able to hide since it's not on the National Security Council, doesn't have to report to the White House. It is able to deny effective forms of oversight. In addition to that, we've cut about $50 billion out of the $120 billion in commitments, continuing commitments. So there still will be a USAID function. So while I'm thrilled to see this happen, and you're right, it's one of those rare moments that, despite all their jujitsu, the plans went ahead exactly as they were planned, but there is so much more fight in this as the AID function continues, and now the entire topography of U.S. intelligence work will have to be warped around a very new apparatus.
Very important point, and it's actually where I wanted to go in the interview. Where are the worst parts of this going to move? Like, obviously, people aren't going to give up on their soft power regime change goals. They're not going to be unthirsty for a slush fund that they can use in these ways. So are there certain nodes within the government, the National Security Council, CIA, State, are there places you're going to be looking for this function to reemerge where it could potentially have a fruitful environment to revert to its corrupt mean?
Oh, absolutely. And there are definitely key hotspot places to watch. So first, it's important for the audience to know that pretty much every department or bureau within USAID is a matching corollary bureau at State. So it's pretty easy to simply take the portfolio and move it into State. And the democracy promotion function of the State Department is pretty much the same democracy promotion function of USAID, but USAID is a lot more nimble. It has a lot more contacts on the ground because it's not formally U.S. statecraft. It can take a much more aggressive posture. But what I expect to see from this point is you're going to see INR, the intelligence wing of State, essentially expand in function as USAID's sort of deniable activities get inherited there. And I'm very watchful about how the development of DRL, Democracy, Rights, and Labor, is going to be at State. So this was probably the most famous rent-a-riot, regime change, coup-mongering center within the State Department. It works with our so-called pro-democracy groups, which it has nothing to do with democracy. It basically is about whether or not your government agrees to the blob's demands. And if you can be as angelic as a dove, but if you don't, for example, agree to an oil deal, or if you decide that you want to take a certain foreign policy agenda that NATO opposes, well, then you'll be declared an authoritarian, and DRL at state will sick its NGO minions on you. Now, one of the things, so while the move from USAID into state is a win, the fact that the National Endowment for Democracy remains effectively fully funded through the State Department is troubling, because the boldness with which USAID was cut, but the much smaller budget that the National Endowment for Democracy has, despite it playing an even more facially abusive role vis-a-vis covert regime change and political meddling, and just its incredible multi-decade history of abuse, suggests to me that folks within the Trump donor world, folks within the congressional allies that the Trump White House feels it needs in order to get a budget done, have successfully put enough pressure on the administration to keep the State Department funding NED. And if they're still funding NED, they're still going to be funding a lot of the USAID rogue work that we're trying to get rid of.
I wonder if our good friend Dr. Darren Beattie, with his senior official status over at the State Department, can get this in his portfolio. Wouldn't that be a wonderful experience? My viewers have been following closely this judicial coup that we've been enduring, and it took a big blow with the halt of nationwide injunctions, but USAID's function happened within Washington, D.C., where you have the D.C. Circuit Courts, you have Judge Bossberg trying to do everything he can to scoop the running of the federal government under his jurisdiction. Do you fear that there could be some judicial rulings on the obligations that USAID still has that could, almost by judicial decree, get it back up and running?
Yes, absolutely. Norm Eisen is spearheading that. There are, for example, Darren Beattie, the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy, has very fearlessly taken on the censorship apparatus that was parked under his purview, getting rid of the foreign influence, malign influence, jujitsu metamorphosis of the Censorship Global Engagement Center. We thought we had a win on that. It was a RIF was done. There were 60 people who were put on full-time leave. There was $50 million in censorship funds that were cut. And because it was structured as a mass layoff, getting rid of the entire function, in theory, we thought it was solid because there was nothing for fired employees to go back to. But then just last week, about a week and a half ago, the AFL-CIO's lawsuit against the State Department. AFL-CIO is the largest union in the country. It's also very, very linked to the Central Intelligence Agency. Leftists used to refer to it as the AFL-CIA because during the war on communism, it was the constant boots on the ground force of U.S. intelligence work. But they are represented by one Norm Eisen. Norm Eisen successfully got a judge to force the at least temporary reinstatement of that agency, which has effectively totally usurped the State Department function. I mean, the judge ruled in that case, which was shocking to even folks who were very used to shock about these judicial rogue rulings, that the State Department has to effectively keep this function and keep these people in this function. At that point, why doesn't the judge just run the division himself? He's basically, we have involuntary servitude laws against forcing people to do work against their will, and now they're forcing the State Department. So I expect, now this is because the AFL-CIO represents the federal unions. When you start getting deep into the layers of the State Department career staff, you have these federal employee unions that are able to effectively use these type of tactics to make them unfireable. So yes, I expect those skirmishes to effectively set the chessboard of how much can get done in the next year.
I wonder if this is going to be a midterms issue. Because some of the examples that you put before the country, that Doge put before the country, were so searing, and they lend themselves so well to political content and political communication. And then you don't really see Democrats shying away from it, showing up at USAID headquarters, holding rallies there. So it seems both sides want this fight. Do you think we're gonna see television ads and mail pieces about the best and worst of USAID and critical congressional races?
Well, it's funny. I think they tried to mount a kind of frontal defense in the early days of it. And then as the scandal count just kept growing and growing, what you started to see was them more kind of launder it in among a host of other issues, identity-based issues, and then they'd lump in USAID or Trump's going to get out of NATO sort of thing. The most recent attempt to kind of rehabilitate the corrupted corpse of USAID reputationally has been this big push in The Lancet this week, and Bono sort of kicked this off on Joe Rogan about a month ago, this idea that USAID is every second that passes, 100 people die because of USAID funding cuts. So it actually, in the time that we've been speaking, Matt, there's probably been about 20,000 people or 2,000 people.
We always thought this show would have a death count, but we didn't know it would be precisely in this manner. I have to ask you this, though, Mike. Like, what has been accomplished here? Even if, we've highlighted you got to play whack-a-mole with this power rising up and appearing in other places. You got to deal with a recalcitrant judiciary. You've got federal employee unions. You've got all those hobgoblins. But like, the book I would read would be the Mike Benz book that uses this as a case study, but also a path forward on how to go after corrupt entities in government. Like, I spent 8 years there fighting against these entities, and they only get more money, more authorities, more power, and they grow stronger. And this is one that is at least getting weaker as a consequence of your work. And so do you ever think about this very precise strategy you used of finding the worst examples of the conduct, elevating that in kind of a colorful, creative way, getting the inside force of Doge to then kick up all of the trash that the government had been able to hide, and then really taking this type of a dismantle, get rid of it with executive action solution set?
Yes, I think that actually that same philosophy is being applied to aspects of the State Department with this massive reorganization. State has basically tore up the entire organizational chart that has it's been a slow moving set of mini evolutions for the past 70 years. And as of 2 months ago, a reorganization plan was put in place that basically restructures the whole thing. And because of that, it totally changes the nature of the conversation. Instead of having endless bureaucratic back and forths about whether one little technical change should be done or not, and then having that, focus grouped and consensus built in committees, we're doing 10,000 changes according to this grand vision, and at best you're going to be able to argue against 100 or 200 of them while we act quickly. And this, I think, is kind of a hallmark of Trump at his best, which is just quick, decisive, bold action, mostly on instinct, without having to constantly consensus build everything. You sort of ask for forgiveness rather than permission, trusting your instincts and what you know to be true in order to not get bogged down and have the process basically allow the much larger entrenched force to just kind of swallow you over time. So I think this has been a fantastic formula, but like I said, we are sort of at the, the Top Gun quote, we're too close for missiles, switching to guns. We fired the missile, and now it's going to be about, how the guns are applied, metaphorically, obviously, in the sense that we've sort of blown the top off of this thing, but now there is going to be the knife fight in a toll booth about whether all of these remaining $50 billion, $70 billion in grant commitments being absorbed into the state portfolio which ones of those to keep. For example, we might not like regime change operations when it's done against Hungary or when it's done against Italy or when it's done against El Salvador. But the Trump administration may want to retain that for Iran or for Venezuela. And that will, of course, beg the same sorts of internal debates as well as external ones with the Democrat Party. But you're going to see a lot of Trump-based folks say, I thought we got rid of this function. I thought because a lot of the branding has been we're sort of getting rid of the USAID function, which is not the case at all. We're getting rid of the rogue apparatus, but because so much of this apparatus was covert in nature. See, the CIA used to really work primarily through CIA proprietaries from the 1940s to the mid-1960s, early 1970s. When those started getting busted, they switched from doing the funding and setting up CIA proprietaries to doing what they called capacities and being, or capabilities and being, meaning they would work with capabilities set up by other public grants, primarily USAID. And so state is going to have to absorb that whole portfolio.
And those entities aren't going away. The thing is that you can go after the infrastructure, but that doesn't eliminate the demand for that capability that's out there among people who probably think they're doing the right thing, but sometimes maybe are, sometimes maybe aren't.
Some of them are.
Yeah.
I mean, admirably, the disassociation from huge vaccine juggernauts like Bill Gates's Gavi, like I said, the $50 billion in cuts that have been done. But what I am concerned about right now is we've identified what's wrong, but the Trump White House has not cleanly articulated a North Star vision of what is right. For example, we say that censorship is wrong, and we've cut censorship funding, which is incredible. But we have not, for example, articulated there's not been a National Security Council memo, for example, like there traditionally is, that says this can do this, but it can't do that.
Right.
This can,
it's basically regulation by enforcement is what we're dealing with because of the fast pace of things. But I've got to leave it there. Mike Benz, executive
it's regulation
director.
by vibe.
Yeah, by vibe. You know what? We've been governed by worse vibes than this. Mike Benz, executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online. Thank you for this incredible work. I know how many hours went into it, and the country is very grateful.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for your leadership as well.